Hi everyone, today's video we're going to be talking about macronutrients, what they are, how they work and why they're important. When we say macronutrients we refer to three major food groups that we consume our calories from, including proteins, fats and carbohydrates. Carbohydrates and proteins contain 4 calories per gram and fats contain 9 calories per gram. Protein is essential for a variety of different functions in the human body, including supporting growth and repair, energy production, supporting immune health and transportation of nutrients. Proteins are made by amino acids. Now, when we have different types of amino acids, they form together in a chain that then creates a protein. Amino acids come in the form of essential and non-essential amino acids. Essential amino acids are the ones that the body can't produce by itself, and therefore we need to acquire these through our diet. Non-essential amino acids are amino acids that the body can produce by themselves. The more complete the amino acid chain of the protein, the higher the protein bioavailability is. Now, protein bioavailability indicates the total amount of protein that can be utilised and used by the body. This chart represents the different types of whole foods that we can eat and also the protein bioavailability that comes along with it. At the top of the list we have eggs, which contain all of the essential nutrients in order to support life, and therefore it comes as no surprise that they have a very high bioavailability rating. Below eggs we have meat, which again, meat is muscles that have already formed in different animals, so when we eat them they're going to have high concentrations of complete amino acid chains that the body can use. Below that is dairy and then plant proteins. Plant proteins typically come in lower concentrations than it does from meat sources, therefore if you are getting majority of your protein from plant sources then you have to eat higher volumes of these in order to get an adequate amount of protein. Our second macronutrient that we're going to be talking about is fat. Now, fat is an energy source in the human body. Once it has burned all the glucose that it has, we use fat as an energy source, otherwise referred to as ketones. Now, fats are essential for human health. They help absorb vitamins such as vitamin A, vitamin D and vitamin E. These vitamins are fat soluble, meaning that they are absorbed with fat and are stored in the body as fat. Once the body has used enough of the vitamin that it needs for the present, it stores the vitamin in fat molecules for future use. Fatty membranes of cells are also supported through dietary fat, and fats are made mainly of triglycerides and cholesterol. Dietary fat comes in the form of saturated and unsaturated fat. Naturally occurring sources of saturated fat include animal fats, butter and dairy, including cream and cheese. Unsaturated fats that come from natural sources include olive oil, avocados and nuts such as macadamians or almonds. Unsaturated fats which I would avoid because they're highly processed would be seed oils. This includes rapeseed oil, sunflower oil and vegetable oil. The reason I say this is that when you look at fast food outlets such as McDonald's, KFC, Burger King and Greggs, all of these fast food outlets use high concentrations of seed oils, and these are linked with heart disease when consumed in high volumes. When we consume saturated fats, they can convert into low density lipoproteins, and when we consume unsaturated fat, then these can convert into high density lipoproteins, otherwise known as cholesterol. Around 80% of the cholesterol that we have in our bodies is genetic, leaving the other 20% as dietary. When we don't have enough cholesterol in the body, then the liver produces more, and when we have too much circulating around the bloodstream, the liver starts to reabsorb some of the cholesterol. Cholesterol is essential for human health as it is a precursor to our androgen hormones. Male androgen hormones include testosterone and in females estrogen and progesterone. Without cholesterol then we can't produce these molecules due to cholesterol being a precursor to both. The last type of macronutrient that we'll talk about is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates come in naturally occurring forms such as fruits or in processed forms such as bread or pasta. When we consume carbohydrates, they break down into glucose and support organs in the body such as the brain. For example, the prefrontal cortex, which is situated at the front of the brain here, is responsible for decision making, long-term planning and rational thinking, and therefore requires high levels of glucose in order to function. Another area of the body where glucose can be stored is in the muscles. When the muscles are worked, then glucose is stored into the muscles in the form of glycogen. So if you have consumed too many sugars, but then you go to work out, the excess amount of sugars that are circulating through your bloodstream will be taken up by muscles. So building muscle is an excellent way of being able to manage your blood sugars. So what happens when we consume too much sugar? When we consume too much sugar for what the body needs, then a hormone is released. That hormone is called insulin. Now, insulin is most commonly associated with diabetes, and that is because when we consume too much sugar, we release insulin. If we consume sugar over a prolonged period of time and have way too much, the body will keep producing more and more insulin. The more insulin that we release, the more likely the body is to become resistant to the insulin, meaning that more insulin is needed to reduce the same amount of sugars. Insulin is a hormone that recognises when we have high volumes of sugar, then it'll convert the sugars that aren't used for the present into fat, so that in the future, if we go through a period of time where we're not eating as much food, we have then fat storage that can be burned using the sugar for energy at that time. An important consideration when you're consuming carbohydrates is to have a look into the glycemic index of the food that you are consuming. Glycemic index indicates the speed at which the sugars is released into your body. The higher the glycemic index, the quicker the sugars are released, and therefore the more insulin you're likely to release when you're consuming these foods. So if we have a look at this graph, for example, if we're to consume a full sugar Coke, then that means that we're going to see a steep increase in blood sugar levels, and with a steep increase in blood sugar levels also comes a steep increase in insulin, meaning that the sugars that are not being used at the time are going to be stored as fat for later. So if you're constantly consuming really high glycemic index foods, you're much more likely to put on body fat comparatively to if you were consuming low glycemic index foods such as fruit or vegetables. Then you would see a moderate rise in blood sugars and a moderate decrease, which means that you're less likely to crave more sugars after then, and you're also going to release less insulin and therefore store less fat. High GI foods, which I wouldn't recommend making the staple of your diet, would include sweets, sugary drinks, white bread and bagels are a few examples. Now, foods like this in moderation are completely fine. It's not going to have so much of a detrimental impact to your health. Context is everything, and you've got to take into consideration with carbohydrates, if you do live an incredibly active lifestyle or you have a very active job, you can afford to have more carbohydrates, and probably more carbohydrates of the higher glycemic index, because your glycogen stores are going to be taking in those sugars and you're also burning them off as they're coming in. So that's something to be taken into consideration. And just because something is labelled as bad for you doesn't mean that eating that food every once in a while is going to have a bad impact on your health either. The majority of your diet should come from healthy fats, protein and carb sources. However, from time to time, if your diet slips, then don't take it too seriously, as consistency is everything, and there's a compounding effect on all of the good and the bad things that you eat. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's watched it to this point, and if you have any questions, then please feel free to drop a comment below